Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Workplace Safety North webinar, New Research on Root Causes of Pedestrian-Mobile Equipment Incidents. My name is Gabby Lemon, and I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. We appreciate your attendance today and want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for speaker questions. Questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. Please note, this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording, a copy of the presentation, and resource information will be sent to you within a few days. Today, we're joined by Tom Welton and Jerry Traer from Workplace Safety North. I'll invite Tom on screen to start today's presentation. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Gabby, and welcome everyone. Both Jerry Traer and I are quite excited to provide the results of both our risk assessment and root cause analysis workshops and some of the next steps associated with pedestrian mobile equipment interaction. The contents is quite a list of things here, but it's really broken into three areas. We'll share the results of our initial risk assessment, which involved industry representatives, subject matter experts, both workers and management from the industry. And we'll carry that forward where we picked a primary risk out of the top 10 that we did a deeper dive or a root cause analysis on. The root cause analysis really allowed us to look at the primary causal factors associated with that risk and carry it forward to identify potential controls. And we'll share with you some of the next steps that we've implemented over the last few months. This particular diagram is a diagram showing a risk assessment process that we follow, or the Swiss cheese model of accident causation, or the James Reason model. It focuses very specifically on understanding that employers have put together a number of controls, and each of these blocks represents current controls in place in a workplace. However, it also understands that there is the potential for latent failures as part of this process, and there's an opportunity for increased risks in relation to things like design issues. It could be using a piece of equipment that's a little bit older, may not meet the new CSA machine guarding standards, and may be missing things like back guarding. And there is the potential for an injury based on some of those design issues. And you can see the white holes in each of the blocks represent some of those issues. And some of the other areas of concern can include gaps in regulations, training material that may not be current, and based on that outdated nature may cause potential issues, shortage of skills key skill sets for individuals operating, or unsafe acts that may occur in the workplace. In addition, the darker holes in the blocks represent failure or absence of risk controls. And again, back to design issues and the machine guarding example that I provided, there may be a reason for machine guarding to be removed from a maintenance perspective, which opens up an opportunity or for a latent failure based on the removal of that guard and the possibility of the machine having to be run for a maintenance from a maintenance perspective. As you can see, the arrow, if all these key areas of concern or failures line up, there is the potential for a catastrophic event occurring. And that's what we're trying to prevent. And the goal of both the risk assessment and root cause analysis for the sector was to identify these key gaps and allow us to share information or recommendations regarding controls where we can eliminate or minimize those gaps. This is the results that the industry came up with, and it was only the voting for prioritizing these risks and developing these risks came directly from workers and management, our subject matter experts. We did have WSN staff and ministry staff that were involved in these meetings, but we did not vote. It was only the specialists, the subject matter experts that voted to prioritize these risks. And just to bring to your attention, the number one risk that was identified by the corrugating sector was associated with lockout tagout, an inadequate lockout tagout resulting in injury. I bring to your attention the various categories of the top 10, and lockout tagout is relating to risks number 1 and 9, or 2 categories. The other area of concern that was really focused in on by the working group was that there are 3 struck by equipment categories that came up in the top 10. And I'll explain a bit more on the next slide why we selected pedestrian stuck by mobile equipment as our primary risk that we wanted to do a root cause analysis on. As it indicates at the bottom, our number 1 risk, as you just saw, was lockout tagout. And this particular risk was also the number 1 risk for the pulp and paper sector when we did a risk assessment as well. The pulp and paper sector had already done a deeper dive through a root cause analysis on this and was working at specific controls. So the corrugating sector working group decided to work on pedestrian and mobile equipment interaction resulting in injuries. What we came up with, and part of our process through the risk assessment and root cause analysis, is to identify a risk statement. It's really our North Star that we work towards, and something we keep referring back to during the root cause analysis to ensure we stay on point and we continue to provide causal factors that are associated specifically with this risk statement. The workshops, both the risk assessment and root cause analysis, are bipartite and a collective approach. The workshop participants are peer recognized industry system experts or subject matter experts. The workshop is open, transparent, and collaborative. The workshop in this case was more of a hybrid. It covered most of the participants through a virtual format. However, we had some on-site in North Bay at our head office where we were leading the discussions. And ranking and prioritization of causal factors was done using employer and worker votes only. WSN personnel, and as I mentioned, we had a ministry representative involved as well, did not vote. These are the individuals that were involved in the discussion. We had representatives from Atlantic Packaging, Cascade, Moore Packaging, both worker and management representatives. So we had quite a variety of individuals from different workplaces from the corrugating sector, and both management and worker representatives. And on the right-hand side, you can see the representatives from WSN that participated. These are the top 10 primary causal factors associated with pedestrian equipment interaction in the workplace. And the number 1 primary causal factor that was identified was lack of awareness or reaction to workplace cues. And the industry representatives identified that working in a workplace for a long period of time, the same location day after day, sometimes you become a little dulled to hazard cues such as backup alarms, proximity lighting, and in some cases ineffective enforcement in relation to lift truck speeds. And these can have a significant effect on the causes of workplace injuries. Excuse me. Some of the other factors that we came up with that rounded out the top 10 were lack of traffic management plans, lack of training, lack of enforcement of policies, no commitment to putting measures in place to mitigate the risk, lack of safety processes, poor work environment, which can include lack of rules, lack of enforcement with, in this case here, specifically this workplace really focused in on the use of high visibility vests. lack of or ineffective policies, improper use of equipment, and not learning from incident reports, lack of awareness to take these incidents a little more seriously in the workplace. Some of the notes that we really focused in on during the root cause analysis is the scope of the exercise does not include an assessment of listed controls. So at the end of our root cause analysis, once we've identified the primary causal factors that are reviewed in the last slide, we engaged the subject matter experts in providing a list of potential controls that could address those primary causal factors. This list of controls provides information on specific controls and activities that support the control, and control performance should be specific, observable, and measurable, as well as auditable in the workplace. In the short term, we did not qualify all the controls. It was just a workshop where we gathered all the information, and we regrouped with the group to share the results and talk about next steps of how we could assist the industry in implementing some of these controls. And I'll turn it over to Jerry at this point to cover the remainder of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So what we ended up doing is once we identify our top 10 factors, we then go in through an exercise of coming up with a number of control measures for each of these topics. So I'm going to kind of go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's 10 plus slides dealing with this. So the first one, with the lack of awareness and reaction to workplace hazard cues, there were a couple of things that we identified. We talked about a lot about training, pre-job risk assessments, ensuring that's conducted across the entire work area. We came up with utilizing awareness tools, focus on how to control the hazards, focus on addressing issues in the physical workplace. So we got into identification of various work zones and auditing and observation of work area by competent supervisory staff, and then ensuring that proper warning systems are in place, blue lights on the vehicles, stop signs, mirrors, all included in that. And then follow up on post incidents to determine whether the cause is lack of attention. And then I think we go on to the next slide, kind of carries on some more of this examination of why there's a lack of attention. So this was really around the root cause analysis, focusing on the contributors, the reason for this lack of attention, complete separation of workers from mobile equipment, talked a lot about designated walkways, made explicit in traffic management plans, and frequent inspection risk assessment. And so, some of these are going to be, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of this with our next steps on what we're going to really focus on at WSN. So we got into a lot into the traffic management plan, which fell under the process component, the complete elimination of possible interaction between equipment and pedestrians. So we got into lane demarcations, barriers, handrails, prohibition of pedestrian entry into traffic laneways. I'm also, seeing this in some workplaces now, even with the regulatory body in Ontario, where they're coming in and looking for traffic management plans to eliminate this interaction between employees, workers, and equipment. I'm talking about establishment of clear processes. So in the event where interaction between this must take place, having pedestrian safety zone policy, part of the traffic management plan, ensuring everyone knows and understands it, formulate plans according to risk gap assessment, on equipment, on layout, use of defined routes, determine whether PPE will assist or ensure lighting infrastructure is appropriate, base plan on the best practices, and examine existing processes, traffic flow, frequency of movement to specific areas that create the high risk. And reality is, and I don't think Tom touched on this a little bit, but when we start looking at this stuff, we're talking about The thing we really focused on for the people, our subject matter experts, was really that, what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about the most, with the workplace, and serious injuries happen? So you'll see that a lot of this stuff is really kind of higher level, trying to put those processes in place to prevent that, at least that interaction between the equipment and pedestrians, but also to make sure, try to remove them as much as possible. We also got into training to ensure workers know and understand the plan through appropriate education. We talked a lot about the regulation of traffic speed, development of in-house requirements. We even spoke about considering baseline limits from the Ontario Regulatory Group for addition into legislation. So, we do see this even like in transport trucks now on major roads, where they've had limits to the speed. So we talked a lot about whether we can have influence with the government regulatory bodies to see if that's possible. Are the numbers that indicate the need for this type of legislation that could be shared, and including a near miss data events that with no substantial damage to the person or property, but could have been much worse. Those are the near miss issues as well. So carrying on, we got into a lot into the area of lack of training, having clear defined training objectives, how to measure that effective, have standardized pedestrian training, best practice, doing some in-house assessment around training and how it's delivered. We're also, the one that Tom mentioned about the lockout is certainly something that we're looking at doing, is to help with clients and the people from the corrugating sector to better handle the training so that the message gets through to the participants, and we see some new ways of doing things in the workplace that maybe are safer and reduce that interaction between employees and the equipment. So again, lack of enforcement. So increase external pressure, ministry inspector roles and what they're doing and what questions are being asked. What are their expectations around enforcement policies? So getting into this, getting the committee involved in this, helping out with the reviewing policy management support, understanding the risk and monitoring effectiveness through their regular inspections, and making recommendations to the employer. So this was an important part that we kind of talked a lot about, just getting people more understanding of the enforcement of policies that the workplaces are developing. You can go ahead. Next slide. So again, no commitment to put measures in place to mitigate was a cultural issue. Make the priority to eliminate the risk of pedestrian and equipment interaction. Clear guidelines, policies, procedures on processes on reducing that risk. Management commitment on recommendations from the committee, actions by management, and then supervisor and worker engagement in the measures to help mitigate this. So to put the commitment to put measures in place and stick to it. We did get into a little bit under the environment component of a lack of safety processes. So things like including work planning, risk assessment, engagement in the workplace, management commitment. We talked about having defined policy and programs, training programs, getting into incident investigation, focusing on material handling and root cause, training on what they don't know and what they should have. You don't know what you don't know. Safety awareness training for all the people in the workplace. And then benchmarking, auditing, observation, looking at overall effectiveness, and then constant reminders using signage and strategic location, changing on a regular basis to help with the focus reminders. So these are a lot of the controls we talked to for each of these 10 items we identified in the root cause. We got into poor environment, including lack of rules or enforcement of high visibility in vests. So very similar to our enforcement component we talked about earlier. So getting workplace inspections being done on the right basis so that you can see housekeeping issues, recommend controls and follow-up. Things like floors, lighting, personal protective equipment, that interpersonal environment, respect, interaction, culture. People aren't hesitant to report, high engagement. So recognition programs. We talked about having realistic expectations for workers. Too much pressure can cause resentment. Creating an environment for workers to succeed. And then control of equipment, who has access or use of it. Only qualified people are allowed to operate. Does it have the necessary technology it needs? We got into the lack of effective policies. So not only enforcing them, but actually having effective policies. So things like incident investigation, again, to review them, to ensure policies are effective, and putting something in place if we understand or notice that they aren't being effective. Ensure they're up to date for the ministry. Policy review annually. Is there an incident to look to see if the policy had been reviewed and if any changes should be included and or added? Communication issues with language barriers, coming up with ideas, ensure working understanding, and then benchmarking with policies around mobile equipment. In our corrugating sector, it's a large group, a lot of different players, a lot of different organizations, and getting into kind of doing that benchmarking where we maybe go to visit another competitor and look to see if what they're doing in the area of that interaction between equipment and people. So the improper use of equipment falls under our tools and machines. So ensure regular maintenance, preventive maintenance is being done as part of that risk assessment. Ensure it's being updated and followed upon on regular maintenance to make sure equipment's not being misused. Mobile equipment inventory of what task each equipment is used for, weight capacities, having the right equipment for the job. Training, so people are aware of the limitations and capacity of equipment and the weight of items being picked up. Having the proper tools for the proper job, awareness of maintenance, rental units, risk assessment of potential of pedestrians interacting with equipment of the job being done. So using all of these tools and equipment to help with this interaction. And the last one, not learning from incident reports. So this was a lack of awareness to take these incidents seriously. This was part of our measures component. So record keeping, previous year's incidents. So really trending to make sure that the trends of these issues are not going up. Centralized software system to help analyze those trends. More training on incident investigation, sharing all alerts with each other, processes and outcomes of the investigation. Again, this used to be a fairly significant thing we used to do in the corrugating sector, where a lot of the incidents that occurred would be shared amongst all the corrugating companies. So kind of going back and starting to do that again. Again, increase sharing within the sector without fear or repercussion when sharing external from an outside forces. So use of safety talks, and then highlighting seriousness of incidents, having the committee monthly talks, which include mobile equipment, sharing videos and information on what's available from an incident. So you can see as we go through this, there's a lot of things we came up with our controls. And then what we did was from this is we created a list of items that we really wanted to focus on. So what should we focus on immediately? So base of a scan of all those controls I just talked about. It was beneficial as a start to focus right away on the following common systemic weaknesses. One of that was a development of a traffic management gap analysis to recommend a best practice approach of controlling hazards of pedestrian mobile equipment interaction within the corrugating sector. So provide an opportunity for workplaces to do this analysis, or for WSN to kind of lead this, to be able to gauge where companies are with their traffic management and try to move towards getting people more aligned with more of the best practice approach to traffic management. So this was probably one of the big issues that we're going to be working on going forward with this, and working with the clients and setting up process to do that, is to develop that traffic management gap analysis and come up with ideas on developing that traffic management plan that's going to help the people within the corrugating sector. We are going to get into development of training course focusing on the following. When you think about traffic management, there's not a lot in the area of training, helping companies, become much better at managing their traffic and managing that interaction between workers and equipment. So that's going to be kind of the focus with this particular element, is to, really deal with the accountability, responsibility of setting up this management system process, enforcement of the traffic management system or process, and putting in those control options, work zones, identifying areas where the interaction is limited, proper warning systems, and then increase the amount of among the workers parties a heightened awareness of pedestrian mobile equipment interaction. So that is pretty much where we are with this. So I guess we're going to open it up. I take it, Gabby, to some questions that people might have.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry, and thanks, Tom. So if you have any questions from the audience, I'm not seeing any right now, but if you do have one, please go ahead and put it in the chat. And in the meantime, Tom and Jerry, I'll ask you if you want to leave our viewers with any final thoughts.
Go ahead, Tom.
Sure. Thanks, Jerry. I guess one of the initial things that I'd like to mention is we couldn't have done this without industry support of subject matter experts. This process allowed us to draw information directly from the industry and provide us with leading indicators of the key risks and hazards that industry feels are priorities. And as Jerry said, what keeps you up at night? And those are key things that we need as an organization to focus in on, but we want to share throughout the industry. So we'll be providing after this session a copy of the final report, as well as an infographic which can be posted in the workplace that summarizes both the top 10 risks and our focused approach and on the pedestrian and equipment interaction, and the top 10 primary causal factors that you can post in your workplace to create some discussion. And also we'll look forward to sharing some of the results of our extra work we'll be doing along with industry in developing some of those next steps. I'll turn it over to you, Jerry.
I don't know if I got much to add to that. I do want to speak. I think, when we got into the pulp and paper version, we're in the process of developing a very nice little lockout assessment component, and I could see, the same thing kind of coming with this, developing that, that gap analysis so that, we can go into workplaces and take a look at how they're setting up their process to limit and to reduce the amount of interaction between, workers and the equipment. And what I envision going forward is that we're going to get into a much better system where we're going to see a lot of similarities going from one workplace to the next around the whole concept of mobile equipment and the interaction between workers and that equipment.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And not seeing any questions from the audience, I will thank everyone for attending today's webinar, New Research on Root Causes of Pedestrian Mobile Equipment Incidents. A copy of the presentation and the recording will be emailed to you within the next few days and posted on the resources page of workplacesafetynorth.ca. Thanks again and have a safe day.